Welcome to the Family Pictures Podcast. I am Michael Branson Smith here with
Jimmy Groom.
And I'm back in the city. You know, summer is over. The horror film festival that we partook in for the past 6 weeks is in the past.
And it changed your life, though.
Yeah, it did. It's been fabulous ever since I understand horror is about allegory, not splatterfests. And I'm in for that,
Yes.
versus the, unnecessary peeler down the cheek. Gratuitous horror crap.
We found none of that in our next film.
No, so we are here to do a nice classic indie film, like old school style. First time director of his first feature, writer-director Sean Wong, takes his film to Sundance. It's a darling. It gets bought by Focus Features, and it has a run as much as indie films can have a run in the 2020s these days. And it's called Didi, and it's a classic semi-biographical story of coming of age of a 13-year-old boy from a Taiwanese immigrant family. And it's very much about his life in the early 2000s in suburban Fremont, California. And, it's kind of that classic kind of postcard of love towards his community. There's, an interview through the IndieWire's Filmmaker Toolkit podcast, which was a great discovery, by the way. I'm really looking forward to kind of listening to those moving ahead. Like and subscribe, IndieWire's Filmmaker Toolkit podcast. Not ours, because who knows? What are we talking about here?
Exactly. Never mind our podcast.
Yeah. And so, Sean Wong literally directs this in his hometown, and he gets his entire community on board. It's pretty much 100% a no-name cast, almost all first-time actors, with the standout exception of Joan Chen, who plays the mother, and she's been acting since the 70s. She's been in freaking The Last Emperor and David Lynch's Twin Peaks. So she's amazing.
I read about her that she was discovered by Mao Zedong's wife.
What?
When she was doing archery in Shanghai. Mao Zedong's wife discovered her and was like, you're special. And she got her first role in Chinese film thanks to Mao Zedong's wife.
Wow. Well,
Jeez.
She made it to the United States and has acted quite a bit in American films, as well as, films out of Taiwan, Hong Kong. I'm not sure. I haven't read up that much about her, but she is the kind of, you got a sense from Chris Wong in his interview that, I'm sorry, not Chris Wong, Sean Wong. Chris Wang is the character name, Didi, Chris. But Sean Wong is kind of, you got a sense from this he was amazed that he got her to do this role, which is pretty cool. Because, you're a first time director of a feature. He had actually had an Academy Award nominated short documentary, and he'd also had other shorts, fictions, and he had been in the kind of, what independent film institute he was part of, not Telluride, I can't remember what it was, but he'd been making his way. He did it the old school kind of 90s fashion, like Kevin Smith style. This self-made filmmaker went to USC Film School as a junior. He transferred in with his and met his cinematographer, blanking on his last name, Sam. Let's look it up. Sam.
Looking it up.
Sam Davis, and all his films, he's worked with him since. And that's such a great, classic story. Similar, makes me think of Darren Aronofsky with his first film Pi as well. And these filmmakers that kind of make these stories of these moments that are typically very personal and connected to a lot of their, personal biographies and experiences they had. But it does well. It goes on to win the Best First Feature and Best First Screenplay at the Independent Spirit Awards. And it is a classic, quote unquote, hometown film. Lady Bird is another example of this, which was baked up in Sacramento, California. So California representing indie film pretty well in this context. But there's some really standout things about this film that we're going to talk about. And I know one of these that Jim's going to adore is the portrait of early social media in the early 2000s.
Yeah,
is there a reason that's interesting to you, Jim Groom? Can you talk about that for our audience who may not know?
No, I mean, I will say two things. Joan Chen, one more thing about her who I found fascinating, is she directed Autumn in New York with Richard Gere and Winona Ryder.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Right, I mean, she became a director.
She's amazing. She has a wild. I was reading up on her career, like wow, and she was amazing in this movie. So major, like that. She in some ways made the movie for me.
Absolutely.
But in terms of the social media portrait, obviously 2008, like I, like many people, was starting to come up into the world of social media. I had left higher ed and I had moved to Virginia and become an instructional technologist. It was integrating social media into the curriculum. And I had a blog, which got very little love in this. But one of the things, and I don't want to say this too soon.
Well, teenagers don't blog, so that's kind of why.
Yeah, fair enough. I have a story about this with my son that I'll bring up later. But one of the things that I was just struck by those interfaces and just the way in which, that was a way to ground me in time. And this movie really, it's a strange movie in terms of how it manages time. And this movie for me, and I said it before we jumped on here, was a slow burn. At first, I was like, what am I watching? Like, what's going on? What did Michael put me to? And it just didn't leave me. And as I finished the film and I kind of woke up and then I was talking with Antonella about it. And as I was walking to work today and doing like all these ideas started to percolate up. And I think it goes to your idea of this was a kind of like classic 90s independent film. It's as if I could have been seeing this film in the theaters in 92 or 93.
Right.
It had both a very specific time and place as well as a kind of like timeless element to it that I'm really kind of digging post facto. So anyway, that's a little bit about, I really love the interfaces. As much as they locked it into a time, they also liberated it, oddly.
Yeah, we're gonna really get deep into kind of, this is a very important part of the storytelling of this film, is the effort that Sean Wang went to tell story through computer screens, which most directors and storytellers like are really, really against. They're negative. Like, oh, you think of like early movies about the net, like what's the Sandra Bullock film that's so bad that I actually still love?
I think it's called The Net.
The Net, yeah. And like they typically do all these like fake explosions and animations to pretend like this is how hacking works and all this kind of stuff. They really eschew what visually actually is happening. Whereas Sean Wang is not afraid of the screen as a really important storytelling device. And there's a lot to unpack there. But I think the first thing to really unpack is this is very much an immigrant story, right? And one of the ways that I kind of like to frame this was like, there's these quote unquote fixed identities of an immigrant family and what spells out success. And there's this great scene about a third of the way or halfway through the film where we have two kind of, you assume both from the same Taiwanese kind of culture, two moms meeting up with their sons and comparing how they're doing, right? And this is where we kind of get the kind of prototypical portrait of what is success for the immigrant family. And this mother who, Chung Sing is the name of Didi or Chris. So Didi is his familial name. Like the only people that call him Didi are his sister, his grandmother, and his mom. And it is the three women that are in the household because his father, at one point the only vision of the father is through this portrait in the bedroom, which is also very interesting.
That marriage portrait, right?
Yeah, the marriage portrait. He is never in the film. There's not a phone call. There's not and it's like she's a single mother and they're not divorced. He's just back in Taiwan making money for the family while the family's raising itself, or truly Chung Sing's raising the family and taking care of his mother, because It's the father's mother, and there's some interesting tensions we'll talk about. But the idea of success, as I was starting towards, is I think best fixed in this, what I call the Tiger Mom showdown, right? This idea of this is how you raise your son, and this is a good family. And she brags about her son's smarts and how he's doing his preparedness for college, and he's already studying for the PSATs, and he has been for a year, even though he's only 13. And at the same time, she's putting down Chung Sing's family, right? Oh, your daughter Vivian, who's about to start college this fall, she didn't get into UCLA. Where did she get into? Oh, UCSD. Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
Exactly.
And the same thing is this. Oh, it's like she describes. I can't even remember what. And he is like the smart. He has a nickname. And there's a lot of screen names, and he's like Smarter Kid is his screen name. And so the Smarter Kid, I can't remember what he does. Like a bunch of different. He plays instruments and has all these classic litany of extracurriculars. And Chung Sing's like, oh well, Didi likes to make movies. He likes to video, and they're like, oh, he's going to be your next Ang Lee, who's a famous Taiwanese director, right? And of course. But then she's like, but of course, the path of an artist is really difficult and you should know that, because one of the things that's a big part of this story is Chung Sing is an incredible painter, but has had no success with her work. And so this is this defining kind of box that this immigrant family is kind of put into through this portrait. And it's kind of interesting to bring that first, even though it's about midway through the story. But how is this family doing? Like, tell me about, because I want you to talk, because I love the opening scene of their dinner. The film starts with a great montage of activities in the house, and it's establishing a lot of stuff, which is great. But the dinner where, Nai Nai, who is basically the grandmother, Chung Sing, Vivian, and Chris all sit down for dinner.
Yeah, Nai Nai is awesome. And so, I mean, that tension that you're talking about is not only with, friends and other piece, it's actually within the family itself. Right. So as these two kids are, arguing at the dinner table, and, as two teenage kids will, arguing, attacking each other, throwing shit at one another, saying horrible things like "you're
bitch." What's the bitch?
That's not a quote from that. A lot of bitch going on, and the mother is pretty much, out of it, not kind of imposing herself on them to stop, and the grandma attacks the mother directly at dinner, and that's where the first moment in this movie where you feel that tension and that unease that comes up again and again, and you understand like the idea of like that imposition of the sense of freedom in America that these kids feel versus what may have or may not happen back in Taiwan as a result of certain expectations and family values or whatever you want to say there. I don't know, not being from Taiwan, but immediately you feel that culture clash. Right. And you feel like the kids, which I kind of liked about this movie, I thought it was honest, is they didn't give a shit. They just kept on doing it. And then he goes and pees in her moisturizer. And like, it goes on, but like, they're not paying attention in the same way of that struggle until other moments in the film. And those moments seem like the points where you're starting to understand these kids and how they're affected by their situation, right? Because the big unspoken thing here is one of the things the friend says with the kind of when they're the Tiger Mom's battle is, I couldn't do it without my husband.
Right. Yeah. I forgot about that one. Yeah.
Knowing it's going to be a lash because obviously our protagonist, she's doing it all alone. Right. And she struggles with that. And that's probably one of the greatest struggles of the movie and one of the hardest pieces of the relationships that are being bombed in this movie. And listening to that Sean Wong interview on the IndieWire, which I did, and that was a good link for you to send to me, I was struck by the fact that immediately they established, so this is really a mother-son movie. Yeah. And like they really framed it as that. And gosh, in terms of Family Pictures podcasts, the whole mother-son dynamic is a strong one and a powerful one. And once they said that, that was another layer to this film that kind of opened up for me, because I had a very good relationship with my mom and a very strong relationship with her, and I felt like she was someone who, while I would do stuff like maybe Sean did, or at least our character
Blowing up
in this movie
mailboxes,
did,
maybe.
right? Yeah, exactly. She was always there, and she kind of had that sense of stability in an otherwise very unstable family.
Yeah.
So it was interesting when that came clean. It really endeared me to this movie yet further. And I think this is one of those movies, like I said, it's going to stay with me for a while, and I'm going to return to it, because what at first just seemed silly, or like, why am I watching this little pimpled-faced, kid run around? But it was so much more than that, and I'm glad. I'm glad it keeps on burning on me. It's a sign of a good film for me.
Yeah, and so we should speak. I mean, even this portrait of a 13-year-old boy that we're kind of entering into, who's known as Wang Wang to his friends. He's known as Chris to who others he doesn't know how to describe himself to, and then he's Didi to his family. And he's played by Isaac Wang or Wang. I don't know exactly which is the correct pronunciation. And he was only a sophomore in high school when he was filming this. Yeah. And there was a great conversation about the filming of the kids. And we're going to get more into the kids, but I want to finish on the dinner. But they were all pretty much unknowns. And what's important is, Sean Wang talked a lot about how much he would try to improv with the teenage actors and encourage them to be themselves and adapt the language to what was their language. And because I think one of my favorite quotes is like, he was like, I'm pretty sure they have a better understanding of what it's like to be a teenager than what I remember being a teenager was like. Exactly. And I love that idea. He's like letting go that our portraits of adults of what teenagers are is very different than what portraits of a teenager thinks of themselves. And so that was a big part of the framing of this film. Is this is a film about what he sensed teenagerdom was more authentically. And these are things that we explored a lot, I think, when we were looking at Cameron Crowe and John Hughes films. And is this more for teenagers to get teenagers excited, like say, Mr. It's Casual talking about, partying and fun. And that's more to attract teenagers to want to watch a movie versus, the Say Anything, which is more of a portrait of the difficulty of the dynamics of actual family and being responsible or seeing the failings of your parents. And that's more of that realistic kind of, this is what teenager means, because it's so connected to actually your parents and family, no matter what, even if you barely ever see them.
I think it's interesting, as he was talking in the interview, and there was a reference in the movie, as Chris or Didi goes to his first party that we see, they're hanging around.
Friends, yeah,
not with the skateboard friends. Oh. He's going over to the friend's house.
Right, the pool party. Right, the pool party. That leads to them watching Superbad.
They're all watching Superbad. And he mentions, originally, there was mention of another movie he made, which was kind of, a direct Stand By Me. And he was distancing himself from that. Right. But then he was like, I wanted to kind of make a film, I was thinking I would make a film like Superbad. Right. So there was another film. So I love that reference. But his whole sense was, I didn't really want to make a coming of age film. Right. Mm-hmm. And how can you have a coming of age film that takes place in like 3 weeks? Right. Yeah. I like that the time again of this movie is brilliant because it really focuses in on a particular moment. His sister going off to college, him getting ready to go into what we presume is high school, and him trying on all these identities. Yeah. And his names, Chris, Didi, Wang Wang, really reflect this moment in one's life when you're going through and trying on these identities. And this movie nailed that. And that's one of the things I'm coming back to again and again is, how subtly it did that. But it wasn't also kind of like Weapons in some ways, saying, here's my grand point for you to take home and, think about, right? It was just an honest portrait of a kid in transition.
Yeah, and I think he speaks of it, and I agree with this idea. It reminds me a lot of 400 Blows, right? This super semi-autobiographical, super specific life of a child in a really very specific context, in a really specific moment in time. And it's the sticking to that. And this is something I've always loved about certain films, that it's like, invite me into a specific culture I don't know, and what the norms of that culture are, and what the struggles of that culture are, and then what are their connections to the kind of universal feelings that we all have as human beings. And then I'm in, because it's like, yes, you're still just a regular kid, even though that is trying to figure out what it means to maybe have a girlfriend, learn how to kiss for the first time, which is this incredible scene where he's searching through YouTube to learn how to kiss, and he's actually he found in a video that has some pretty good advice, honestly, when you hear it, as he's practicing on a pair of slices of apples, emulating lips, which is
That
so
was
funny.
awesome. The apple slices.
Yeah, and so this is this really lovely specific portrait, and to just, funnily enough, go all the way back to the dinner still. In one of the opening scenes, there's these two pieces of discourse that come from, and this idea, this is something where I'm going to kind of transition to, this discourse of Nai talking about what a man's supposed to do, right? And you're supposed to, because Didi's not eating enough, and he's like, you need to eat, you need your muscles, and that will make you strong, and that's how you will be a provider, and blah blah blah. But who are we watching? We're watching Vivian's response, right? This is the direction that we're getting. It's like, she's focused on Didi, but we as an audience are focused on Vivian's reaction to that. And then the same thing kind of comes out of Chung Sing talking to Vivian about, you need to eat your fruit so that your poop's not too hard. And it's like super funny and specific. You're like, oh my God. And then you see the embarrassment of the two teenagers at this dinner table, and then those two blow up, and it's really, really funny. But that's a big part of this, is this, I put in the notes this idea of, it's this really specific story of language, of the language of cultures. And so there's all this familial language, and you've already touched on one of the most important ones, which is Nai interacting with Chung Sing. And it's really, really tough, because Nai is really, really hard on Chung Sing throughout the film. And there's kind of one of these big blow up moments when after Didi's gotten in a fight, and it's a really funny scene. He's hanging out with his boys, Fahad and Hardeep and Soup, and he gets pushed into the middle of a ring to fight this, local white kid who's like, doing the classic joke, gross joke of angling his eyes with his fingers. It's like to talk about him being Asian, and he ends up. And the funny thing about the fight is, like, he slaps him in the face, and that kid goes, "Hey, no hits to the face," and then a moment later, he literally punches out Didi in the face. And you're like, what the fuck? And so when he comes home and he's got this great, and this is again super specific, his mother is holding a hard-boiled egg to his bruised eye.
It's always interesting to see what cultures use what fruit or what food to deal with that. Like in Italy, it's its own thing. Like I learned here, like when I got sunburned, put yogurt on it. Like, and my wife has all these different things that really work, but they're culturally specific to Italy. And like, I think that's super interesting to get a look inside their house. And like when I was growing up on Long Island, I remember going in, and Soup says this about his, like, why are you called Soup? It's because his house always smells like soup. Yeah. And I think there's this idea of, these different cultures have these different traditions. And, as a result, their houses and their habits and the cultural aspects of them change. And it's the ongoing pressure of a cultural kind of transplant, if you will, to kind of both hold on to what they have and who they truly are. I mean, these kids are truly partly Taiwanese. Their dad's still there. Their grandma's there, brings that culture, and you can see it in her dress and the way in which she kind of upbraids them or tries to raise them. Like, they're hybrid. And you can see that in the way and the mother struggling with this dream of the US, which I think is interesting too. Like, she talks about her dream, and her dream is very specific to her kids, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But I think there's also in the background, like, one of the things I think Sean Wong is doing really intelligently here, is kind of undressing the American dream logic with the immigrants in ways that, like, sure, there are certain elements here that are good to be here and to talk about and the options and whatever, but like, let's say it like it is. It's a drab house in a drab community, like where you're going to the mall or you're blowing up mailboxes. Like, I don't know.
It's the suburbs.
Like, exactly.
But at the same time, I love those friends, like Soup. You get a sense that he's probably Sikh because he has the turban on. But you don't know where he's from, and he has a lot of friends of color. But the funny thing is, they're also guessing at cultural identities. There's this one quote. It's like, wait, is that Mexican Kenny? Because they don't know if he's actually Latino or not, and so they're all like kind of in this soup of different cultures themselves. And in that portrait is so interesting. But we are primarily focused on the rules of this Taiwanese household that Nai Nai is kind of so frustrated with her situation, and she is haranguing the crap out of Chung Sing over and over. And there's back to the egg on the face. She's saying, your son is fighting people like a gangster. It's one of my favorite quotes. And then that just like derails into, the police are going to arrest him. They're going to beat him up. And then he's going to have injuries that leads to him blind. And then he's not going to be able to go to college because of this, and never have a job, and never get married. And then the Wang family legacy is over.
Exactly. It ends with him.
It ends with him because of he's got a black eye. And that's that kind of relentless pressure that Nai Nai is putting on Chung Sing. And in that particular moment, Chung Sing is like in front of Didi quietly responding. Like, that's her role, is to grin and bear it, or just to bear it. And that's we really kind of feel for her in those moments where she's just absorbing all of this negative attention from Nai Nai.
Yeah, and there's a great moment I'll get to that, a great moment with her later on. But back to this question of identities. Obviously it's hard enough for a 13-year-old, 14-year-old in those transitionals, say between middle school and high school, however, to be dealing with just who you want to hang out with and who you are and who you identify as. It's another thing on top of that to identify with a whole nother culture, and then know that, when you bring friends back, which he does to his house, like, there's a whole sense of embarrassment, which is something he's kind of, haunted by, with, the other, this other way of living. They never speak Chinese. Right? No. They only reply in English. And I think it adds another layer of complexity to that level of identity. And it's interesting to me because one of the things, I imagine in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up, there was an impulse to hide that, right? To just fit in with the kind of like the sense of like, I'm an American kid, whatever that means, right? And kind of hide some of that cultural identity that came behind. That goes for the Irish, the Italians, the Asian communities that came in. But when I was at UCLA in the 90s, one of the things that emerged, particularly from film students like Justin Lin, who's a Taiwanese guy, I was there when he was at UCLA. We worked at ABS together. He did a lot of the Fast and Furious films, and he made a film called Better Luck Tomorrow, which became a kind of really big hit. Yeah. Well, like, their identity was that one of his films, and part of his thing was to kind of resist some of that erasure, but at the same time not be completely classified as an Asian American director, but like, a director, right? Like, kind of get rid of some of those labels. And it's interesting because this film is really kind of telling that story almost from the viewpoint of a 13-year-old. In a particular family. And I really like that. And I wonder, and I wanted to hear him reference Justin Lin, but he didn't. But I wonder, like, is there any kind of reference to those, early 2000 filmmakers who were doing some of the early work like this. There's another guy, Quentin Lee, who was at UCLA at the time, who made a lot of queer Asian American films, and he was pretty radical. So there's a whole tradition of using film to kind of like explore these identities and blow up some of these preconceptions, or either some of this idea of hide that identity, which you had in the 70s, 80s with these kids growing up. So anyway, it leads a lot of places to me, this film, that I didn't expect.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I'm thinking of like Ang Lee and how, you know, in his filmography, he wasn't really exploring that. He did, I guess he did in The Wedding Banquet. That's actually very true. But then he kind of takes on a lot of these very famous kind of stories of kind of white culture, like The Ice Storm, which is a film I think we're considering really soon, you know. But then he goes to this kind of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which is this kind of, I mean, that's like, you know, wuxai, like karate film stuff, which I freaking love. I mean, if we can ever figure out how we can do a wuxai kind of like kung fu film, family pictures, you know, we really could. One of my favorite films, and I've showed you this film, I blogged about it forever ago, is the notion of getting the mixing the crane style of your mother and the tiger style of your father to defeat the Pad Mai character, the white brow. It's so great. So we are going to do that eventually.
but I wonder if some folks, though, you know, because Ang Lee also did Hulk. He did one of my favorite movies of all time, which is, did he do it? No, I'm wrong. He didn't do it. But he kind of broke out of some of those.
Right. Yeah.
Those kind of preconceptions.
Brokeback Mountain being the kind of his pinnacle.
He needs to do an Asian American film. And like, no, he's doing great films. He's a great director. And I think that's, you know, a certain amount of liberation. And that's part of maybe what this identity struggle and how intense it is for this kid at 13. It's just another layer of a cultural identity that you have to unpack and deal with in a place that's ultimately, while it says we accept everyone and everyone's great, you know, that's not always the case. The homogenization is real, and they want you to be like them.
Yeah, and Wang Wang, so he like literally explores, you know, when his friends we meet in the beginning, you kind of realize he's not comfortable there. And this is a big part of Wang Wang's character with all these identities he's playing on. So first is his identity with his family. And it's like his kind of trying to make sense of, I'm embarrassed, this embarrassment I think you're talking about. And he takes it out on his sister. And it's really funny, his relationship with his sister, which we'll get into too. But his friends, his so-called friends, Fahad and Soup and Hardeep, they're really comfortable with the discourse of the teenage boy. Like, you know, it's really loud, obnoxious, mixed with, you know, Wu-Tang quotes and popular culture. And he tries to emulate them and be part of their kind of the way they speak. And he doesn't know how to do it. He tries to adapt, and he has some success adapting for a while, but then ultimately he always ends up fucking it up. And I think my favorite example of this is when he's on this weird double date, right? He's with Fahad, and they're at like a, you know, it's kind of like an arcade, but not an arcade. With
it's
these
like
two
the
girls.
Place in Karate Kid.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it's making me think of. That's why I thought of the arcade. Yeah. We just don't see like the water slides.
It's like mini golf, water slide, arcade, right?
Yeah. And you know, Fahad's like holding court like he does throughout this film by using his knowledge of popular culture and putting on like he's doing a comedian skit, and he doesn't admit it's some other comedian skit. I can't remember the one that like
Dave Chappelle, right?
Dave Chappelle.
Like, that's a Dave Chappelle skit.
And he knocks him and he elbows him, like it's like, shut up, man. And so this girl's like, do you have anything funny to say? Which is something I think we're going to dive into deeply about the internet culture thing, is this pressure to perform for an audience at all times. And so he's put on the stage to perform, and he's like, okay, yeah, there's this story of the squirrel, which visualized is hilarious. And it's basically boys being boys, really stupid, find a dead squirrel and then just start fucking with it and slinging it around. And it's really disgusting. And they break the tail because like, I think it's Soup is like chasing them with it while he's swinging it. And then the girls are absolutely horrified, and Fahad is like horrified because it's like, I'm not supposed to show that version of myself to these two ladies.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
And one of the girls' parents like works for PETA. It's like, I could have
yeah,
you arrested.
I got arrested, and they ditch him, right? And this is the first
Yeah.
group that ditches him. He's ditched by his supposed best friend. Like, there's this really interesting interface moment with Facebook, and he's like, you know, who's your one of this all the stupid secret questions you're supposed to answer. Do you do secret questions? What's your habit with secret questions?
I don't
hate
answer.
Yeah. Well, they force you to create accounts at times, right? In various things. And I always put the same phrase for every single question. It's always the same answer. And then and then I put like, and it's always tuna fish. And I'm like, because I don't, it's like, it's stupid. My best friend, tuna fish. Your favorite movie, tuna fish. The first place that you had sex, tuna fish. You know, like that's what it is. So anybody who wants access to my accounts, try your best.
Tuna
anyway. And so these are his discomfort comes up again and again, and he has, and we'll talk about the skater group, which he feels really excited about. He's going to be their filmer, and there's parts of it that he's doing really well, but he doesn't know how to navigate his failures with that. And that's the thing. It's like, it's ultimately this being a character who's super uncomfortable and not understanding how to navigate failure, right? And feeling the only way to deal with that is to kind of remove yourself from that embarrassment. And that's a big part of this story of him being alone in his house. And I think maybe we could segue into a big part of this story is the culture of the internet and how he spends time navigating his time alone as a teenager in a burgeoning social media world.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. The AOL Instant Messenger kind of interface, when I saw that on top of the MySpace, you know, I was like immediately like, what year is this? 2007, 2000? Like I was trying to date it immediately. Turns out it's a few weeks in the end of the summer of 2008, which tracks. AOL probably wasn't as popular then for at least for me, but like, yeah, it was interesting to see, you know, the spelling, B, the pressure and the ability for him to say, oh, I'm interested in this girl. Let me go look at what her interests are. So I can kind of fake that a little bit with the movies. And probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie is, so he does this and there's that whole internet him, but then him and her go on essentially a date and they're on top of a slide together and she's making advances. But before she does, she's like, you know, she quotes Yoda and she's like, and he's like, haha. And she's like, do you know who it is? And then she starts quizzing him about his real knowledge. And he just bombs. He doesn't know who Yoda is. He doesn't know who E.T. is.
No, he doesn't know who E.T.
He didn't know who
hasn't seen Jaws, E.T.,
he hasn't seen Jaws,
Star Wars. Yeah, it's like, who are you? No, it's I've seen Superbad, man. Yeah, and there's like, so, you know, what's cool, so what's interesting is Sean Wong talks about how he actually worked for Google Creative for like 6 years before he transitioned into being a full-time filmmaker. And he talked about how much they spent time on interfaces as storytelling devices, you know, and I mean, obviously it's now we can think about it as kind of nefarious efforts to keep our attention and let us and get their claws into us and never let go. But he understands the screen is this incredible storyteller, and he talks about the idea of the blinking cursor, you know, or the slow movement of the cursor to a choice of what you're clicking being a reflection of the emotion of a character. Like, you know, so there's these moments, for example, when post the date with Madi, where he is like, what was the game they're playing? Are you nervous? She like gets closer and closer to him, and are you nervous? Are you nervous? And she's trying to advance to get physical with him, like kiss him or something like that. And then he suddenly blurts out, yes, I'm nervous. And she feels really awkward, and he feels ashamed that he was, you know, nervous about the actual experience. And the next day she tries to reach out through, you know, AOL's Instant Messenger, and her username is Meowwitz Maddie times X3, and his is Big Wang, you know, 5'10". So, and whereas his best friend is Fahad the God with a 0 for the O in God. And so it's that stuff is just so fucking awesome. It's so specific. I love it. Good. And so she tries to say like, hey, you know, check out if you're okay. And what does he do? He immediately types like, yeah, sorry, I was embarrassed.
Yeah.
But he doesn't send it. He instead blocks her. And this is
Yeah.
this like slow movement of the cursor to select block. And then the classic real thing we do with choices on computers is you have to choose to let go when you're clicking on something. There's the push down event, and then there's the push up event. The event, this is like web nerdy stuff. But that's the idea. It's like he has to let go, and that's what he does. And that's a great example of this storytelling through screens. And I think the Facebook wall is another one that was really incredibly important. This is the early days of Facebook. And there's this stuff where he has to make a profile, and back that's, you had to use your real name. So everybody's profile, so, in AOL Instant Messenger, it's a bunch of like, you can be Fahad the God as well as you can in your MySpace page. But on Facebook, you have to be Fahad, and I can't remember his real last name. If I looked at it, it's probably there. It's he has to be Fahad Mahmood, right? He has to be his real name. That was that. There was no sock puppeting in Facebook in the early days.
No.
And he has to use his real date of birth, and he has to give his best friend, and he has to, but he still gets to use his email, which is a Hotmail, which is babiesandfire@hotmail.com.
They really did nail the usernames. And I was also impressed, with the Hotmail. And I felt the tension of the screen, just like the character, right? Like when they were at the screen, he did a good job of shooting that and making me feel that tension, and also a certain amount of, apprehension every time as a kid at that moment you come up against the screen, and did a really good job of suggesting how much of our social relations are moving to these spaces. It's not like they're only there, but what happens in the physical and the virtual now really start to impact one another in real ways. And I think this film did a nice job, again, a light touch of it, suggesting that that's part of the fabric now. And to completely ignore it is also ignore what it is to be a 13-year-old in 2008.
Yeah. And to just not know what to do. And so like, Chris's like awkwardness, he wants to engage. He wants to be accepted. And that's the classic, tension of the teenage kid who feels misunderstood and knows he's awkward and wants to be part of the culture around him. And there's like these examples of, Facebook wall highlights stuff, because I was on Facebook for like 2 minutes and I was like, screw this. And there's things like James Tennant is in a relationship with Katie Thiel 41 minutes ago. And then the response is an OMG FB Facebook offish OFFISHHSISHHHH with a classic emoticon like heart, and these are the kind of things. And he wants to be part of this and respond and say, there's the literal blinking cursor of what's on your mind, right?
Yeah.
It's your turn. Come on, get in this. You're supposed to be funny too. You're supposed to be interesting. You're supposed to have relationships. You're supposed to have thoughts, a Tupac quote that means something to everyone, and that's how you're going to be accepted. And he can't figure it out.
Yeah, it's you're, again, whether it's in real life or whether it's on the virtual space, right? You're kind of rifling through these identities and taking these things. And I'm seeing that happen right now with my kid. I have a 15-year-old kid, and I have an 18 and a 20-year-old kid. And the 18 and 20-year-old, they're kind of a little bit more stable, although it will change. My 15-year-old, though, he's been like working through his computer stuff. He's working through his art stuff, his music stuff. And some of it really is coherent, but like, it's just super cool. I love the age. As a parent, I have loved the ages from 11 to 13 or 14 in terms of that sponging all these different elements of who they are and trying to figure out that movement into what's expected to be more of a social scene, right?
Yeah.
It's not a kind of mistake that he goes to a couple of parties and maybe has his first party where he gets, fucked up and his sister has to help him out. Like, those are real transitional
Wait,
points.
so is this your kid, or are we talking about Didi here?
No, Didi, my kid.
No, I know.
My kid does not do that. Actually,
just for the
that's
audience,
another story.
This is Didi that we're talking about. That goes to the skateboarders' kids' party and he gets fucked up, and it's his sister Vivian who he's fought with previous to this moment, like really aggressively, and she takes care of him and hides his sickness from his mom. Right.
Yeah.
And so
I love this age, and I love like this idea of identity. And I also think it shows how fluid identity is.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows you like that is not a static reality. And, in some ways that honesty of him doing this and trying to, have a 13-year-old portray that is a lot more. And you talk about this a lot with real people in the scenes, but also real places. Right.
Yeah.
And it turns out the place a lot of this is taking place is in his bedroom, his real boyhood. So it's in
I forgot about that. Yeah, right.
real boyhood bedroom, which must be a trip for him to shoot this film in his boyhood bedroom. But it goes to your point of a lot of what you like about these films, which I really agree with you, is kind of returning to real spaces and kind of, taking on that sense of authenticity. And that gives this, when I was listening to that podcast, it gives it yet another layer of, what it's like to look into this person's life as a 13-year-old dealing with something we've all dealt with in terms of who we are, identity. Like, Michael, I'm sure there's a point where you transitioned from your military kid to something else. And that was an interesting transition, I am sure.
I know. In trying on the hats, like I remember, an example of that too is like, so my younger 13-year-old self, like kind of Didi's age, I was still enmeshed in Boy Scout culture, and that Boy Scout culture had a lot of militaristic, parts of it. We would wear camo. My best friend Chris Hall and I would go in the woods and wear camo and play war. Love Vietnam War movies, Wolverines and all Red Dawn and stuff like that. But at the same time, I was a swimmer from age 8 through 18. And as I started navigating high school, and my friend Chris Hall, who happened to be not in my school, we were in public school together, and he was a year older, so we weren't connected, academically. And that became this point of disconnection that grew and grew and grew as my friends. I started to navigate and understand how to build social relationships within my classroom, which I was actually pretty bad at because I had bounced from a lot of schools in my early days, from grammar school to grammar school, then you go to middle school, and then you go to high school, and there's all this change, and I never was connected closely to my classmates until maybe my sophomore year. And you start to pull away, and I can remember one of my Boy Scout friends who I loved and loved aspects of that social life, because I loved camping and I loved the woods to this day. And I came out to say hi, and then I must have been wearing like a prototypical jock outfit in their mind. Like I had like sweatpants on and a t-shirt, and they're like, or maybe it's a WHS swimming on it. I don't fucking know. I don't remember. And he called me out as being a jock, and I was like, whoa.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it was just, I mean, in the specifics of the story, I can't grab onto exactly, but that feeling of that being called out on, your identity's changing by someone who I was close to, was really hard. And that's that embarrassment that Didi feels again and again and again throughout this story as his identity's called out on him. One of my favorite ones is he meets these skateboarders. Once he's discarded by Fahad, after his failure with the squirrel story, he meets these boys that are skateboarders, and he's really out forward, which is really nice. Like, he literally finds them in a parking lot and he introduces himself, and it leads to a connection where he says, like, I'm a filmer, I'll shoot videos for you and stuff like that. And you get a sense like he has some basic skills, but he's like 13, so he's not like a professional or anything. And they invite him to come film them at this industrial park, and he shoots, and it seems like it's all going super well, until they, a week or so later, come to his house to see the clips that are on his computer. And there's some good stuff there. But then there's this moment where, there was the security guard that confronted them to kick them out of the industrial park. And I think it's Donovan, who's kind of, you get a sense is the leader of the group, confronts the security guard. And then he's like, fuck you. And then he skates off and does a cool ollie or a cool trick as he leaves. And he was supposed to have captured this on film, and he failed to capture it. And he doesn't know how to navigate this failure. And at the same time, his mother, as this is happening, his mother pops in. And he's already lied to them that he's half Asian, not full Asian, not Taiwanese. And his mother pops in speaking, Chinese. And what's interesting is Donovan, he's this interesting bridge of identity. I think Vivian's this a little bit too, where because he's older, he's a little bit more mature. He is the gross boy talking trash, drawing dicks on signs and stuff like that, like from Superbad. But then he can also code switch and be like, no, I don't smoke, or, oh no, don't I don't think of myself as someone that would say fuck you to the security guard. I see myself as more of a peace guy. Like, so he has this other identity. And so there's this confrontation in his bed, in Didi's bedroom, where he basically tells his mother to fuck off. And all three boys are kind of like, what the fuck is your problem?
Yeah,
like,
exactly. They turn on him. And the thing that's interesting is Donovan, like, immediately he's kind of like, you get the sense that he's one of those people, like, he notices the art, he connects it with the mom, and he says, like, I really love your art. And the mom lights up like a Christmas tree.
I know.
Like, she is so thrilled that someone, and there's that
sees her. Right.
Yeah, he sees her. And that's like one of the first times she's seen in the whole film. And it's a really interesting scene. One of my favorites, actually, because of her reaction is so amazing. And, and then you also see, because that's ultimately that leads to, the showdown between Didi and his mom. Didi clocks some kid who's being obnoxious to him at the kind of study group. He knocks him out, and then they have to deal with the families, right? And then they have to deal with, like, the aftermath where the mom has to go and talk with the other moms, and Didi feels like the mom's not taking his side. And so Didi freaks out, runs away, and stays out overnight. And then there's the moment where Didi comes back and confronts his mom and says, I think he says something to the effect of, like, are you embarrassed of me? Or,
what does he say? Chris, and he says, are you ashamed of me?
Ashamed of me. And then she tells this amazing story.
And in that moment, that's also when we, for the first time, see his father in the entire film. This is at the very, very end. So there's this looming portrait, so there is this fight that happens, as you described, and he runs away and spends the night in the park, and he comes back, but he goes right to his mother's bedroom. Yeah. And as he walks in we see this massive portrait, and it's this really vaulted ceiling room. So the bedroom is incredibly large too. It's really interesting, like moment of suburban life here. It's like, even though, she feels really kind of stuck in this life. And I think you're gonna let you talk about her dream she talks about.
Yeah,
right?
The dream is great.
But there's this portrait, her wedding portrait, with her and her husband, and it's looking down on the two of them. And it's like he's lording over this conversation in a funny way of what the perfect family is supposed to be. But go on, take over. Like, how does she respond to his calling out her? It's like, are you ashamed of me?
Yeah, it's interesting because she immediately says, I had dreams, I've had dreams of obviously being an artist, but thinking about, what if I never met your dad? What if I never had you two, and I lived in a studio or had a studio in New York City and was a successful artist? And you're like, oh shit, like, mom's going to drop, some hardcore knowledge on the kid. Like, wake up, you're lucky to be alive. But then she turns it beautifully and says, look, but I'm realizing, you and your sister, you are my dream, the world you're living. And it's just a beautiful moment of the son and the mother, regardless of the words and the vitriol and the struggle between everything. Like, that bond, that beautiful connection is as solid as it's ever been. And you get a sense from that. I mean, it's not a coming of age story. It's not like everything changes, but you just get this view, this like peek into a life where you think, given that, this kid probably is going to be all right.
Yeah.
And I think that for me is the kind of, I don't want to say smallness because that might seem derogatory.
No.
But like quotidian almost, like that sense of like, look at this, like a slice of life from their kind of moment of connection that tells a story. And it's interesting. I was listening to Quentin Tarantino recently saying, I hate biopics, and saying a biopic is a waste. You know, no one's life is that interesting. I would be interested in like, you know, Elvis Presley going into Sun Records that day or two would be interesting. But a biopic about Elvis Presley, it's a waste. No one's life is really that interesting. I found it when I was thinking about that with this film, like, yeah, doing this as like a 2 or 3 week film about a summer of transition is kind of a brilliant choice.
Yep. Yeah, and you know, this is like the culmination of this story. It turned in, as Sean Wong described, it went from super bad to a story about a mother and a son, and the tension of them trying to connect, like her desire to be seen for her art. There's an earlier moment where she shows this portrait she's done of likely a self-portrait of her with her son on the beach, and it's a beautiful portrait. We only see glimpses of it. And she's like, what do you think? And he's like, I think it's, and he said, his response is, I think it's stupid. And then he's watching some trashy YouTube video and she's like, what are you watching? And he's like, I don't know. And she says, don't behave that way. And so they're butting up against one another throughout the film about each other's tastes and interests, and they're not connecting. There is this one brief moment that's an early connection, which is really funny, where, you know, he's driving her home and he's like, Mom, did you fart? You know, and he's like disgusted by it, and the window's broken, but then she starts sniffing, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, I'm sniffing it up for you. I'm sniffing up the egg sandwich I had for him. And he likes
my lunch, whatever, salad for lunch, I think she
egg
says.
Salad sandwich. And she's connecting with him because she has his sense of humor. Right? It's kind of gross and dark.
Yeah.
And you suddenly realize, oh, they have a connection. And then they have McDonald's together, but then it falls apart really quickly again.
The McDonald's together is great when she's cutting up and arranging the burger is just so cool. But I think that's a really good insight, though. Like those moments, right? Like to capture that and that sense of independence in this film of like, you know, trying to do something kind of like the Europeans do, right? To suggest a vibe of life, you know, a moment of life rather than, you know, the traditional arc, you know, where someone has to die or something tragic has to happen for us to get anything out of this story.
Sonny, my boy!
I like that, you know.
Look what they've done to my son.
I like that they kind of resist it and or that he resists it in this, and it works well. I think he made a better choice than the Superbad movie, if you ask me.
Yeah, and instead of it being just all Superbad and about boys being stupid and drawing penises all the time and why they're justified in doing that, you know, she also in that final speech, she's talking about, so I'll read part of it. It's like, how could I be ashamed of you? I'm so proud. But then she says, but sometimes it's a little hard.
Exactly.
Right. And that's parenthood. It's like, it's you know, kids are kids, you know?
Yeah, that's good. Well, I have one thing to leave you with.
Okay.
Michael.
What's
Eat
that?
your fruit and play your statuses.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.